Shocking claim at the heart of this case. Advocates and some public voices say male DNA has been found on the garrote, the very makeshift noose used to strangle JonBenét, while other experts insist the garrote was never properly tested with today's powerful genetic genealogy methods. John Ramsey now says he wants those exact items reprocessed using modern investigative genetic genealogy, IGG. This isn't rumor, it's the hinge on which decades of unanswered questions might finally swing, but the key details remain unconfirmed and contested. If you care about cold case science and accountability, hit subscribe now, ring the bell, and drop your view in the comments below. Should the police immediately retest the garrote and other evidence with the newest methods, or is caution warranted? Tell us your city too, we read every comment. From here we go straight into the heart of the debate. We won't retell the well-known headlines you already know. We will not dwell on the pageantry and the pain. We are going to follow one fragile, weathered object. A broken paintbrush handle wrapped with cord, a domestic tool turned into a weapon, and a potential repository for truth. Tonight's script is a close-up on the garrote, on the DNA that may, or may not, remain on it, on the laboratories that can now read genetic whispers once considered impossible to recover, and on the institutional decisions that have kept this evidence under lock for decades. This is a forensic, ethical, and human story all at once. What science can do for justice and what it cannot. Imagine that garrote in your hands. It is an ordinary piece of wood, familiar to any household with art supplies. It is rough, bits of paint cling to the grain. Knotted into a slip, it is simple and brutal. In a murder investigation, objects like this are simultaneously mundane and critical. They are intimate. They are handled. They carry the history of whoever gripped them. The technical notion at the center of our story is straightforward. Biological material, skin cells, sweat, hair, can cling to cord fibers and wood crevices for years. Advances in DNA science have made it possible to coax genetic profiles from minuscule traces of those materials. That possibility is why the garrote matters now more than ever. But the path from a scrap of DNA to a named suspect is neither short nor guaranteed. 2 decades ago, forensic teams relied primarily on STR profiling, the method used to match a DNA sample directly to someone already in a law enforcement database. When a profile did not match, investigators often considered that a dead end for immediate identification. Investigative genetic genealogy, the technique that changed the game in several high-profile cold cases, uses a different kind of genetic readout. Instead of STRs, it uses single nucleotide polymorphisms, SNPs, which can be compared against public genealogy databases to build distant family trees. From a handful of distant relatives, skilled genealogists can sometimes work their way inward, narrowing a search to a likely suspect. But that requires the right kind of genetic material, and enough of it, and an unbroken chain of custody, and impeccable lab technique. That is where the controversy begins. Publicly, there are 2 loud and conflicting narratives. One narrative, repeated at conferences and amplified by advocates and some investigators, says the garrote was never tested in an IgG-compatible way. The other narrative, born from private conversations and ambiguous second-hand claims, suggests male DNA was detected on the garrote years ago. Put bluntly, one side insists the sample exists and is usable. The other side insists either that the sample was never taken in the way we now need, or that any sample that was taken has been consumed, degraded, or is incompatible with modern genealogy. Neither claim has been settled in a transparent, published forensic report. Listen to what John Ramsey has been saying. He has spoken plainly about new genetic techniques that his team calls IGG, Investigative Genetic Genealogy. He has urged Boulder authorities to employ those techniques on any remaining items that could yield SNP data, including the garrote, the fabric from beneath the body, and other artifacts that were either untouched or only partially examined decades ago. He says he has been told bits and pieces by investigators over the years, he has read second-hand accounts, and he has seen advocates claim that the garrote was never properly analyzed for genealogy. John is clear about his motive. He is not seeking headlines. He wants answers for his family, for the little girl who was lost, and for the sense of closure that eluded the household for decades. Now imagine the crime lab room. It is quiet, lit with the steady clinical light of preservation and caution. Technicians peer through microscopes. They weigh how much sample to consume to produce results and how much to reserve for future tests. These are real, difficult decisions. The scene in Boulder was, by many reports, heavily contaminated in the earliest hours. Family members, friends, and first responders moving through the house inevitably left their own traces. That chaotic early handling is the reason some investigators have historically counseled caution. Indeed, if a sample looks likely to be contaminated with DNA from multiple hands, converting it to genealogy format might produce mixed or uninterpretable data that misleads rather than helps. And yet, technological progress has been dramatic. Labs today can create robust SNP profiles from incredibly small amounts of DNA, often working with degraded samples that would have been unusable 15 or 20 years ago. The same labs that helped solve the Golden State Killer case and other cold files developed methods to lift SNP-level data from hair shafts, from blankets, from minute touch traces, procedures once thought impossible. Advocacy groups and private victims teams now push jurisdictions to re-examine old evidence using these newer tools. That is the crux of John Ramsey's public appeal: reopen the physical archive, modernize the testing, and let the data speak. At a true crime conference not long ago, an attorney asserted bluntly that the Garrote had never been surgically tested in a way that would yield SNP data. That claim rippled through social media and the press. Supporters cheered. Critics demanded documentation. At the same conference, some commentators suggested that male DNA was present on the Garrote, a claim interpreted by many as proof that the killing could not have been the parents. The media whirlwind that followed highlights the real problem. In the absence of official, documented laboratory reports, rumor can become indistinguishable from revelation. This is a case study in why transparency matters. So let us walk carefully through what needs to happen next for the debate to move from partisan shout to forensic fact. First, what is the current status of the physical evidence? The police agency in custody of a case must be able to account for every significant item, list who tested it, and publish what tests were done and when. In many cold cases, this simple inventory is the first breakthrough. It clarifies what remains available for new testing and which items have been consumed. Second, laboratories with demonstrated expertise in low-input SNP conversion must be engaged under clear chain of custody protocols, ideally under court authorization to ensure admissibility. Third, victim families must be kept informed under a victim rights protocol, while investigators retain necessary confidentiality to protect a potential criminal probe. Consider the possible outcomes of such a retesting program. If SNP-level data can be recovered from the Garrote and yields a genealogy lead, the implications would be enormous. A credible genealogical match funnels investigators into a manageable suspect pool, yielding opportunities for targeted interviews, surveillance, and, if probable cause develops, court-ordered DNA swabs. If that happens, and it is still a conditional if, the case could pivot dramatically from one of persistent ambiguity to one with a modern investigative roadmap. Conversely, if re-examination consumes a limited sample and produces no usable SNP data, the result is heartbreaking. Law enforcement will have used scarce material in an attempt that led nowhere. Worse, if the sample is so degraded or contaminated that any genealogical hit is unreliable, that false lead could divert precious resources and taint public perception. There are also ethical complications. Investigative genetic genealogy operates at the boundary between public interest and personal privacy. When a genealogy lead relies on distant relatives who voluntarily upload their DNA to public sites, those relatives did not consent to being a vector into a criminal investigation. The law is developing, but so far the consensus is that IGG is permissible and valuable when performed under strict oversight, when the lab work is documented, and when investigations follow constitutional norms. This is why some law enforcement agencies move deliberately. They want to avoid creating a legal mess that would be tossed from courtrooms and smear lives. Beyond procedure, there is the human story. John Ramsey has lived 3 decades of both grief and public suspicion. He watched his wife die before many questions had answers. He has gone from being a charged subject in the tabloids to an advocate pressing modern science into service for a daughter's memory. In interviews, he speaks with a blunt urgency. If the sample exists that can be converted to SNPs, test it. If the lab work has already been done, publish the report. If not, open the chain and let accredited scientists try. He is a father who wants finality. He is also someone aware that the longer a case remains unresolved, the greater the risk that evidence is lost, samples degrade, and memory fades. Still, we must be clear-eyed. For every triumph IGG has delivered, there are cases where genetic leads proved dead ends. A genealogy tree can collapse under the weight of incorrect assumptions. A match can point investigators to an innocent person with merely circumstantial ties, and press leaks, rumors of male DNA on the Garrote, can stigmatize people without a shred of judicial process. Responsible investigators are painfully aware of these hazards. That is why the public debate should insist on both urgency and restraint, urge testing, but demand transparency and rigorous scientific standards. What should a responsible retesting program look like in practice? First, a full public inventory of evidence must be released, listing items previously tested and the methods used. Second, an independent panel of accredited forensic geneticists and genealogists should be convened to recommend specific labs and protocols. Third, courts should grant protective orders enabling the use of public genealogy databases in accordance with privacy safeguards. Fourth, the victim's family should be provided a confidential liaison to receive updates. Fifth, any hits from genealogical analysis should be handled delicately. Investigative follow-ups, not public accusations, should follow until court-ordered matches validate suspicion. Now let us imagine the scene where such a test yields a result. Imagine a lab quietly emailing investigators with a promising SNP profile, distant cousins in a particular county, a family tree that narrows to a handful of men with opportunities consistent with the crime. What happens next is not instant conviction. Detectives would develop investigative hypotheses, secure warrants, request DNA swabs lawfully, and then test those swabs with STR profiling for a court-admissible match. That extra step, converting a genealogical lead into a direct match, is essential for justice. The public, hungry for certainty, must be patient through that methodical, sometimes slow, but legally necessary course. If the test yields nothing, what then? The answer is not resignation. A negative result refines the evidence landscape, tells investigators what is not working, and helps direct resources elsewhere. A failed test is not wasted time if it is handled transparently and if the scientific community learns from the protocol. What must be avoided is secrecy combined with inaction. If police decline to retest because of budget or fear of sample consumption, they must say so publicly. If they are testing but cannot disclose work product for legitimate investigative reasons, they should provide the victim's family with periodic confidential updates. When agencies do nothing and say nothing, rumor fills the void and speculation hardens into mythology. It is worth stepping back and asking a larger question. Why has modern DNA not yet resolved this case if male DNA appeared on some items 30 years ago? The pragmatic answer combines several factors. Early investigators had different tools and different priorities. Evidence handling standards were not as rigorous as they are today. Early contamination and the sheer number of people who moved through the scene eliminated or muddled traces. And, frankly, institutions stumble. The longer the case rests, the more delicate the forensic work becomes. That is the tragedy of old cold cases. The sands of time erode not just memory but material. But time has also created an opportunity. Genetic genealogy has matured into a powerful investigative adjunct. High-quality labs now regularly extract SNP profiles from hair shafts, from minute-touch DNA, from degraded cloth. The success stories prove the methodology works, when applied properly. The core argument in favor of retesting the Garrote, therefore, is not based on hope alone. It's a pragmatic belief. We now have a tool that didn't exist when the case was first investigated. It should be used if viable sample remains. As viewers, what can we do to encourage both urgency and discipline? First, insist on transparency. Ask local officials to publish a clear inventory of what evidence exists and what tests have been completed. Push for independent oversight of retesting decisions. Support victim rights protocols that require investigators to keep families informed while preserving necessary secrecy. Advocate for courts to create protective orders that allow IGG to be used responsibly. Finally, insist that media coverage avoid premature naming of suspects or sensational claims in the absence of confirmed, court-admissible evidence. We close with a human note. Underneath the scientific complexities, the policy debates, and the procedural chess games, there is one permanent fact. A little girl died, and her family has lived with an absence so deep it altered everything. The garrote sits as an emblem, mundane and terrible, of the choices made in the investigation and of the possibilities that modern science might finally open. If male DNA on the garrote exists and can be converted to genealogy-compatible SNPs, the door to a new era of investigative leads swings open. If it does not, then the case remains not a puzzle left unsolved by technology but a reminder of how fragile evidence and justice can be in the face of time. So what should happen now? For the sake of science, for the sake of the living members of a grieving family, and for the integrity of justice, a coordinated, transparent effort must be pursued. Publish the inventory, engage accredited IGG labs under protective court orders, preserve sample integrity, and keep the family informed. Do not rush to the headlines. Do not weaponize rumor. Let modern science do its work in a courtroom-ready, ethically governed way. If you want to push for real progress rather than social media verdicts, make a constructive noise, share this video, sign petitions that demand forensic transparency for cold cases, and contact elected officials to ask for publicly accountable retesting policies. If you believe the garrote must be analyzed with the best technology available, say so in the comments below, and tell us the city you're watching from. If you believe caution is essential to preserve the integrity of potential evidence, explain why. We will read every thoughtful comment. The story of JonBenét's death remains one of the most painful unsolved crimes in recent memory. The garrote is one thread in a larger tapestry of errors, of grief, of science and procedure, of media frenzy and institutional failure. If modern genetics can pull a name from the noise, we will not accept it lightly. We will insist it be corroborated, validated, and pursued within the bounds of law and the demands of evidence. Until that day, the questions remain open, the hope remains alive, and the call for transparent, scientifically rigorous action grows louder. If you believe in careful, forensic-minded pursuit of truth, subscribe for updates. If you want to support independent efforts that help families push for modern testing, look into reputable cold case review organizations and consider contributing. Above all, remember that lives, real people, real families, hang in the balance. Justice delayed is a wound, justice done properly is a salve. Keep demanding both rigor and compassion. Thank you for listening. We'll keep following this story as labs report, as prosecutors weigh options, and as advocates press for action. If the garrote yields its secret, this channel will bring you the verified details. If it does not, we will explain what that means and why. Until then, stay curious and demand transparency.